Hi guys, so what could be considered good news or also considered bad news? Boris Johnson has restarted the daily briefings surrounding the pandemic. Now, in this particular briefing, he seems much more serious and much more somber than he normally does. And he talked about perhaps further measures, more expensive measures to deal with the pandemic. Now, reading between the lines, I would assume what he's talking about is a second lockdown, because the current scenario is locking down individual cities or areas of the country. That doesn't seem to be working. It's patchy. You're having areas that are locked down that are having spikes. You're having areas that are not locked down having spikes as well. So this approach doesn't seem to be working. And I think perhaps the experts, the scientists, are telling him, you need to change direction. We need to consider a lockdown. Now, before we go to the video, it's important to remember that in Parliament, Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, talked about how they're going to consider new measures, but these measures will, of course, be voted on first in Parliament. So Parliament, this was a concession against a rebellion. So Boris Johnson risked a rebellion from his backbenchers on allowing him more measures to deal with the pandemic. They asked for Parliament to have more power in relation to giving the government these measures, not giving him a blank check to do whatever the hell he wants. The caveat in Matt Hancock's response to this was to say that the government need to act quickly, and it could be the case that the government are able to bypass Parliament on certain occasions, perhaps when they consider drastic. So let's hear what Boris Johnson had to say.
But the best way forwards to protect the NHS, save lives, to keep our children in school and the economy moving is to follow the rules wherever we live. So I want to thank everyone for the fantastic national effort that we are seeing and continuing to see. And no matter how impatient we may be, how fed up we may become, there is only one way of doing this, and that's by showing a collective forbearance, common sense, and willingness to make sacrifices for the safety of others.
And I agree with this, but the problem for Boris Johnson is that he has not taken responsibility for the mistakes the government have made. It's one thing to say we're all we're all in this together. You've made mistakes, but we are clean. Other governments, for example, in Scotland, they admitted to making mistakes. They apologized for those mistakes. In Italy, here in Italy, the government apologized for the mistakes it made at the beginning of the pandemic. It didn't lock down quick enough. It didn't lock down the entire country quick enough. Many people died because of that. They apologized for that. I think it would go a long way to regaining public support if Boris Johnson and the government apologized for the mistakes, be them PPE, the initial lockdown, the easing of the lockdown, the test and trace. All of these things have been disasters. And Boris Johnson continues to ignore the government's responsibility when it comes to that.
At this critical moment, when I know people will be wanting to know the details, I will be providing regular updates through these press conferences. And I have to be clear that if the evidence requires it, we will not hesitate to take further measures that would, I'm afraid, be more costly than the ones we put into effect now. But
this really annoys me. I wish Boris Johnson was much clearer. If he just come out and said, this is the criteria for a second lockdown. If we hit this number of new cases per day, we will have to impose a second lockdown. So that at least he's laying his cards on the table. He can actually say, this is out of my hands. He said, this is not my decision. The scientists have explained to me, the science shows that if we hit this number, for example, it doesn't have to be an arbitrary number, but it can be a number based on some sort of data. If we hit this number per day, we need to impose a lockdown, a second lockdown. That's out of my hands. Let's work together. We have made mistakes. We will try and fix the mistakes that we've made. We need you to be on board with us to try and keep that number below so we don't impose another lockdown. But saying vaguely, with this opaqueness, that we may need to do another lockdown, I think it creates a sense of a lack of a sense of security. In the sense, what I mean is people feel maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's not so serious. Perhaps there will be a lockdown in the future. I think people need to realize how serious it is. But once again, the government have to take responsibility also.
If we put in the work together now, then we give ourselves the best possible chance of avoiding that outcome and avoiding further measures. I know that some people will think we should give up and let the virus take its course, despite the huge loss of life that would potentially entail. I have to say, I profoundly disagree. And I don't think it's what the British people want. I don't think they want to throw in the sponge. They want to fight and defeat this virus. And that is what we're going to do. Even as we fight COVID, it's vital that people get all the treatment they need for other conditions. But it must be clear, if the NHS were to be overwhelmed by COVID, then no one could get any such care. And that's why...
Sorry to interrupt in there, but yeah, I agree 100%. This needs to be front and center all the time. This is the reason why we had lockdowns in the first place, to protect the NHS. Maybe he should reintroduce that slogan again. Protect the NHS. Because once the NHS is overwhelmed, then all bets are off. Then it's over. You have been defeated.
Why we must bear down on this virus now so that we never reach that point. And I'm absolutely confident that with ever increased testing, with better treatments, and of course with the prospect of a vaccine, we will get through this. So let's follow the rules, wash our hands, cover our faces, observe social distancing, download the app, as 14 million of you have already done, and together we will fight back against this virus, protect our NHS, and save many more lives. I'm now going to hand...
So this is the prospect of the future. This is what we're going to see every day. Boris Johnson coming here and asking people to follow the rules. I really do believe, and I don't mean to be like a broken record here, but I do believe that he needs to reach out. He needs to be honest with people. Say, this is what we have to achieve. Give people a target. But at the same time, he has to accept responsibility for the mistakes the government made. No one's going to beat you over the head with a stick for saying, okay, we made mistakes with PPE. Maybe Keir Starmer will say something once in Parliament about it, and then it's over. But at least people will understand that also the government made mistakes. It's not all on the people's shoulders. That's all I really have to say about this. It does look more and more likely that the UK is going to go into a second lockdown. Other countries around Europe are seeing massive spikes. They're probably going to go into second lockdowns as well. Now, the lockdown may be different to the lockdown we saw at the beginning of the year. Maybe a weaker lockdown, maybe not as aggressive, not as restrictive, but I still think that there's going to be some type of lockdown. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?